Daf Tesvav, and the Brisa had listed 8 Nevi'im that descended from Rachav. That's Yirmiyah, Chanamel, Baruch, and Sariah. And they were the sons of another 4 Nevi'im. That's Chilkiah, Shalom, Neriah, and Machsiah. Now, Bishlema Inu Mefarshe, we understand very well that those 4 that we mentioned, Yirmiyah, Hananel, Baruch, etc., they were known to be Nevi'im because they all expressly described in the Psukim, they are defined as Nevi'im. And you can go through the Psukim and you'll see very carefully that each one of the 4 is called a Navi. And with regard to Yirmiyah, of course, the entire Sefer Yirmiyah is written by the Navi Yirmiyah. With regard to Chanamel, it says, Vayovo Elai Chanamel ben Dodi Kidvar Hashem. That means that he had received the Dvar Hashem. It was Nevuah, it was prophecy. And Baruch and also Sariah were all disciples of Yirmiyahu. And the pasuk says, in Yirmiyahu, it says, Vayomer lahem Baruch mipiv yikra ilai, es kol advarim ha'elu v'ani kosev al hasefer bidyo, hadover asher tzivo Yirmiyahu hanavi Esraya ben Nariah ben Machasya. So we see that these were the Talmidim of the Navi, they themselves were Navi. Ella of Hasrayu minolan. But what about the fathers of these Nevi'im? Right, these were the sons of Chilkiah, Shulam, Neriah, and Machseah. How do we know that those 4 prophets? And the Gemara answers, Kida Ula, the Omer Ula, called Makom Sheshmo, Shem Av Binavius. Whenever you see in Nevi'im that they mention not only the name of the Navi, but also the name of his father in connection with his prophecy, then Biyadua, we know it's evident, Shehu Navi ben Navi, that he's a Navi, the son of a Navi, meaning the father is also a Navi. And perhaps the logic behind this statement of the Gemara, that the father is also a Navi, is that the Tanakh didn't have to mention the name of the father. If the Tanakh mentioned the name of the father, then it's probably going out of its way to teach us that the father is also a Navi. Therefore, Biyadua Shu Navi ben Navi, Shmo v'lo Shem Aviv. Let's say, for example, we have cases where the Torah only mentions the name of the Navi, but not the name of the father of the Navi. Biyadua, then we can derive the conclusion, Shehu Navi, the prophet is a Navi, but Lo ben Navi, but his father is not a Navi. And we're still learning Ula. Ula says, Shmo v'shem iro meforash, v'yadua shumi osa ir. If the name of the Navi is mentioned together with the name of his city, then it's evident, we can derive the conclusion that he came from that city. He was born in that city. But if the Tanakh omits the name of his city, we assume, if we don't have any evidence to the contrary, and the Torah omitted the name of his city, that he came from Yerushalayim. We learned in a Brisa, Kol Shemaisa V'Maisa Rosav Stumen, if the Tanakh omits any mention of the deeds of the Maisim of the Navi, or the Maisa Vosim, or the deeds of the fathers of the Navi, then and we'll see an example in just a minute where the Torah, the Tanakh goes out of its way to single them out for praise. Kigon, here's one example, and this example is taken from Tzfanya, and Tzfanya received the word of God, he's praiseworthy. Kigon, it says, Dvar Hashem, Asher Haya El Tzfanya, Ben Kushi, Ben Gedalia. So it mentions that he not only is the son of Kushi, but he's also the grandson of Gedalia. V'yadua shu tzadik ben tzadik And if the Tanakh goes out to identify his yichus, going back to his genealogy, even 2 generations earlier, you know that he is a tzaddik and his father is also a tzaddik. If the Tanakh singles out a particular action of a particular individual for negative, meaning he violated something, he's a bad guy, the Tanakh is really vilifying him. Keep going. Here we have an example from Yirmiyahu, and this is the Maisa for which we fast on Tzom Gedalia, the 3rd of Tishrei. Chodesh Hashvi is Tishrei. Ba Yishmael ben Nitzanya ben Elisha. And Yishmael, and we'll soon see what he's guilty of, but in any event, he's singled out here as Yishmael, the son of Nitzanya, and the son of, well, grandson, you could say, of Elishama. But Yadua Shu Rasha ben Rasha. That if the Torah is talking about someone as a Rasha, someone here in this case was guilty of murder, then by mentioning his father's name, it indicates that his father was also a Rasha. Amar Rav Nachman, Malachi Zev Mordechai. We have at the end of Tanakh the book of Malachi, and Rav Nachman identifies Malachi as Mordechai. So then you could ask the question, if his name is Malachi, why does the Megillah call him Mordechai? Lama nikra shmo Mordechai. Well, actually, we assume that his real name, his original name, is Mordechai. But why does the Tanakh call him Malachi? Shahoya Mishnah Lamelech. He was next in line. He was, in a sense, the right-hand man of Achashverosh, of the king. And he's considered like a malach. Malach is a shliach. And therefore we call him malach. So this is all a reflection, his significance. He's as significant as an angel. Beisvei, Gemara now rejects Rav Nachman from the following verse. Baruch ben Neriah, Usroya ben Maseya, Daniel uMordechai Bilshan, V'Chagai Zcharia uMalachi Kulam Nisnabu B'Shnas Dayim L'Daryavish. So we have a whole list of those who prophesied in that same year, which was the second year of the reign of Daryavish. And all these prophecies are about the Binyan Beis HaMikdash, the rebuilding of the Mikdash, because before that time, during the reign of Daryavish's predecessor, and although they had begun the work on building the second Beis HaMikdash, but there was intervention. And it's only in the second year of the reign of Daryavish, the son of Achashverosh, that the Nevi'im here exhorted the people, return to the rebuilding of the Beis HaMikdash. And on this list, we have Mordechai and Malachi as separately listed. Shufta. This certainly contradicts the principle of Rav Nachman that we should identify Malachi as Mordechai. Anya. Now we're going to talk about Malachi himself, who he was. Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, Malachi ze Ezra. Chacham omrim Malachi Shmo. So Ezra is also described in Tanakh as a Malach, and therefore the name Malachi is indicative of Ezra. Chacham say no, Malachi is the name of that Navi. It's not a secondary name. He doesn't have another name. Rav Nachman, Mistaber command the Malachi ze Ezra. This seems to indicate that Rav Nachman retracted his original position, identifying Malachi as Mordechai. Now he's identifying him as Ezra, accepting the view of Rabbi Yeshua ben Karcha, the Tziv, based on a Poskim Malachi, and it says regarding the views Malachi, the prophecy of Malachi, Bagda Yehuda v'so Eva Nessa b'Yisrael u'b'Yushalayim Ki chilel Yehuda Kodesh Hashem Asher Ohev Uval Bas El Nech. Judah has dealt treacherously, and a disgusting thing has been done in Israel and Yerushalayim. For Judah has profaned the holiness of Hashem in that he has loved and married the daughter of a Necha, El Necha, an alien. So Malachi here is giving very harsh tochacha, coming down very hard on a Jew who took a Gentile wife. Uman afrish noshim nachrios, and which of the greats of Israel was famous for separating between Jews and non-Jews in a marriage situation, meaning, let's say in this case, a Gentile woman who is married to a Jewish man. And that's the case here of Bogda Yehuda, because he married a Bas El Nechar, Ezra. We know that Ezra was the champion of this agenda, of this enterprise and project to separate the Jewish men from the non-Jewish women. As it says in the Pasuk in Ezra, in Perikut, it says, Vayan Shchanya ben Yechiel mibnei Elon, Vayomer li Ezra, Anachnu ma'alnu be'Elokeinu, Vanoshev noshim nachrios. So this man by the name of Shchanya, who's the son of Yechiel, amongst the sons of Elam, cried out and exclaimed to Ezra, we have transgressed against our God, and we have taken in, meaning married, alien women. So the Pasuk is relating that Ezra charged those who had taken Gentile wives to get rid of them, to divorce them, expel them. But the similarity of the message of Ezra and that of Malachi is so striking that maybe they were the same person. And now we go back to Rachav that we discussed on the previous dot. We learned to the Brisa. There were 4 women that were Miss America, so to speak. They were of exceptional beauty. And Yefefios is not just Yafa, but double Yafa, not just beauty, but beauty amongst beauty. Perhaps meaning they were unsurpassed in beauty. Sarah, Avigail, Rachav, Esther. These were the 4. Now, we're not exactly sure about the Girsa here. If you take a look at the Masoros Shas, there's a question about Avigail and Rachav, because there's a Gemara Bava Basra that has Chava instead, and she's not even listed here. So we're not sure which of the actual 4. But in any event, what do we see over here? That Esther is one of the most beautiful women. But Lamandi Omer Esther Yerok Haisa, we had an opinion of Rabbi Yeshua ben Korcha back on Daf Yud Gimel that Esther had a greenish complexion, kind of a sallow complexion. She only appeared to Achashverosh as being beautiful because of a divine intervention, because of a miracle from Shemayim. And therefore the Gemara says, Mapik Esther Ma'ayel Vashti. Take out Esther and replace her name with Vashti. Tan Rabbanon, we learned to the Brisa, Rachav Bishma Zinsa. It means that as soon as you mention the name of Rachav, then a person was driven by passion. Yael Bekola, Avigail Bischirasa, Michal Batshol B'riyasa. And the voice of Yael was very attractive and aroused men. And Avigail, if you just thought about her, you remembered her, or Michal, the daughter of Shaul, if you saw her, that would, shall we say, inspire lust. Omer Rabbi Yitzchak, Kala Omer Rachav Miyad Nikri. If a person would say the word Rachav twice, he would immediately have a seminal discharge. That's how aroused he would get. Amalei Rav Nachman, Anna Amina Rachav Lo Ichpasti. And Rav Nachman says to Rabbi Yitzchak, I don't know how you can make such a statement, because I said Rachav, nothing happened. Amalei, so Rabbi Yitzchak said to him, Kika Imna Biyod'a umakira. I'm only talking about someone who knows her, someone who is familiar with her. And once you mention her name twice, that is going to arouse the lust, the point to which you become a Valkyrie. Now, Tosa says that the word Yoda'ah here in this Gemara refers to one who had relations with her. And then Makira is telling you one who had even seen her. So it's either Yoda'ah or Makira. Mordechai started crying out loud bitterly when he knew what was going on. Pasuk in the 4th chapter of Esther. My Omar, what was like the meaning of his cry, that he cried out a bitter, loud cry? Rav Omar, and here we have machlokas again between Rav and Shmuel. Gava Haman ve'Achashverosh. Haman is a bigger, so to speak, Balgaiva than Achashverosh. Haman would propose the destruction of the Jewish people, where Achashverosh never actually thought of undertaking that. Of Shmuel Omar, Gavar Malka Ilah mi Malka Tato. That when it says that Mordechai cried out, what he said is that, and this is a euphemism, that the upper king, the king of the heaven, God, has prevailed over the lower king, meaning over Achashverosh, but in truth it's the opposite. The pasuk says, "Vatischalchal hamalka," and this is a kind of a fear which is much more intense than yira and other words that indicate fear. This is a very, very profound kind of a fear. And perhaps it comes from the word chil, which would be the root of the word vatischalchal. But in any event, Esther hears about Mordechai's activities, and she felt a certain impact that would have on her body, and it caused them to loosen. Mai vatischalchal, Omar Rav, according to Rav's opinion, shepersa nido, she became a nido. Rav Yimi Omar, she had to move her bowels. But Tikra Esther la Hasach. Who is this Hasach that Esther summoned? Omar Rav, Hasach ze Daniel. Again, we're going to have machlokas here between Rav and Shmuel. Rav identifies Hasach as Daniel. Why does the Megilla call him Hasach? Now, how do we know B'chlal that Hasach was Jewish? But the very fact that Esther called him in and entrusted him and relied on him, that itself indicates that he must have been Jewish. And we assume that the only known Jew amongst the king's officers was Daniel. And why was he called Hasach? Shechatachu migdulaso, that it cut him down from his greatness. Because he was in a very high position amongst the officers of the courts of Belshazzar and all those who came after Belshazzar, like Darius, for example. But yet, when Achashverosh came to power, he demoted him. Shmuel Omar, why was Daniel called Hasach? Shekol divrei malchus neftochin al piv. All the royal affairs were decided by him. And I'm not sure whether or not Shmuel disagrees with Rav. The Das Maza Ve'al Maza, Esther sent Hasach to Mordechai to find out what was going on. Why was he wearing sackcloth and engaging in mourning? Rabbi Yitzchak Sholcha Lo, Esther submitted a message to Mordechai, Shema Avru Yisrael al Chamisha Chumshei Torah. Perhaps Klal Yisrael were guilty of violating the 5 books of Moses. Because describing the Aseres HaDibros, which contain all of the mitzvahs HaTorah, and she uses the term Mazeh ve'al Mazeh, that parallels the Mizeh u'Mizeh heim ksuvim, which means that the Luchos HaBris were written on both sides. And this is the Yisod of Rav Tzaddik Gaon and many after him, that in the Aseres HaDibrot we have an encompassment of all the mitzvot HaTorah. So Mordechai sends a message back through Asach to Esther that she should go into Achashverosh and plead for the people. She refused. It would be a capital offense to approach the king without being summoned. So she told Asach to send that message back. Vayagidu leMordechai eis divrei Esther. And they told Mordechai the words of Esther. And notice the pasuk, it doesn't say that he, Asach, told Esther, but they told Esther. Vayagidu in third person, in plural. What does this mean? Who conveyed Mordechai's statement to Esther? Ilu lo ozla gabe. Asach himself did not go back to Mordechai to relay the message, which means that Esther refused to carry out Mordechai's request, and rather mikan she'ein moshimin al kalkol. When you're sent on a mission, you don't report back with bad news. Vayagidu leMordechai is divrei Esther, meaning when Esther sent back a refusal to Mordechai, it was not sent through Hasach because of this principle, ein meshimin al kalkol. Megilla says, Lech knos kol Yehudim, and then it says, Asher lo kedos, meaning I'm going to go into the king, even though it's against the law of the land. I'm going to put my life in danger. Omer Rabbi Abba, shelo kedos hayeh shebechol yom b'yom arachshav b'yonis, the achshav b'rotzah. What it means is that every time she had relations with Achashverosh, she was always be honest. She was always compelled. But now, for the first time, she was going to go willingly to have a relationship with Achashverosh. Avadati, and her concluding message was, if I'm lost, I'm lost. Just I am lost from my father's house. And the Gemara back on Daf Yud Gimel says that her father had died right after she was conceived. Her mother died at childbirth. Is so too, I am lost from you. By voluntarily agreeing to have this relationship with Achashverosh, she would now be forbidden to Mordechai. And this again reflects the opinion that she was married to Mordechai. And when a married woman has an extramarital relationship, which she does, b'ratzon, then she's not allowed to go back to her husband. Vayavar Mordechai. And the pasuk says, "Vayavar Mordechai vayas kechol asher tzivsa olav Esther." Amarav shehevir yom rishon shel Pesach b'tainis. In other words, when Esther declared a 3-day tainis, which Mordechai conveyed to the people on behalf of Esther, it included amongst those 3 days the first day of Pesach. And that's the lashon of hevir. Vayavar Mordechai, the lashon avera, that they would violate the Easter of fasting on Yom Tov. Shmuel Omer the Avar Arkuma Demaya. Mordechai crossed over a pool of water in order to gather the people together on the other side. What is the significance here of Mordechai crossing over a body of water? Again, the Jewish community in Shushan was on one side of the body of water, and the royal palace was on the other side of that river that ran through the city. It could be that the pasuk is indicating how crucial it was, or perhaps there was some element of miracle here. Vayehi b'yom hashlishi, v'tilbash Esther malchus. She dressed herself on the 3rd day of the fasting in royal garments, and we'll see. Let's say if it's, let's say, the 3rd day after the proclamation went forth, then it was on the 15th of Nisan. Big day Malchus Mibayis. The Pasuk said that she was wearing royal garments. It just says Malchus. Amar Rabbi Lazar, Amar Rabbi Chanina, Malamit Shelavashta Ruach HaKodesh. She was clothed in Ruach HaKodesh. Ksiv Hacha Vatilbash, Ksiv Hasam. And here we have a pasuk in Divrei Yomim. It says, V'ruach lovsha es Amosai. The Spirit clothed Amosai. And that's Ruach HaKodesh. Omer Abulaz, Omer Abchanina, Liolam al tihi birchas hejo kal beinecha. Don't take for granted as unimportant a blessing that's bestowed upon you by a regular person, a hedge, an ordinary person. Two people who are prominent in their door, berchum shnei adyotos, they were blessed by two regular rank and file citizens, and the blessing came to fruition. David Vidaniel. Which brachos were bestowed by a hedge on, respectively, David and Daniel? David Devarche Avarna. So there was a man, Ben Avarna, who blessed David at Siv. As the pasuk tells us, and this is in Shmuel Beis, it says, Vayomer Avarna el Hamelach Hashem Elokecha Yirtzecha. And this bracha came to fruition because it says, Vayoser Hashem la'oretz v'te'otzer amagefim al Yisrael. Hashem was entreated for the land, and the plague was held back from Israel. Daniel de Barche Daryavish. Daniel received a blessing from Daryavish, and this is when Daniel was cast into the lion's den, and Daniel was saved and not harmed by the lions. And what was the blessing of Daryavish? Eloch di'ant palachle bisdirahu yeshez vinoch. Your God, whom you serve continually, will save you. And the Maharsha points out that it wasn't that Daniel was saved merely because of the blessing of Daryavish, but certainly Daniel was saved because of his own tzidkus, his own righteousness. But nevertheless, the blessing is mentioned here because the pasuk is giving it some significance. So it was a contributing factor in the salvation of Daniel. The Omer Abulazar of Chanina, Al tehi kilas hejot kala beinecha. This is the flip side. Don't take for granted as unimportant the curse of an ordinary person. Shari Avimelech kilel es Sarah. Avimelech said about Sarah, Hine hu lach ksus einayim. Behold, it will be for you a covering of the eyes. This is Bereshis Perek Chaf, and the Gemara of Bava Kama on Daf Tzadi Gimel says that Avimelech told Sarah, since you're covering the truth from me, and you didn't reveal that Avram was your husband, and you caused me all this pain, may it be God's will that you would have children of covered eyes, meaning blind. For this kind of bizarre, as it says, when Yitzchak was old, his eyes were dimmed. And here we have another member of Rabbi Lazar in the name of Chanina. Let's compare and contrast Kaviyachol to man, flesh and blood. Midas basam adam, man, Adam shofes kedera. A person puts a pot on a stove. Then he adds water into the pot. First he puts the water, and only then does he place the pot around the water. In order to fulfill, as the pasuk says, l'kol titein hamon mayim b'shamayim, the sound of his giving a multitude of waters in the heavens. And that's a pasuk in Yirmiyahu. The pasuk continues and says, "Vayaleh b'siyim b'ktzei haaretz." He raises clouds from the ends of the earth. So first, God puts water in various locations in the heavens, and then he introduced clouds to contain the water. Yom Rabbi Lazar Chanina, another teaching. If someone says something in the name of someone who said it, then he brings redemption to the world. Esther Lamelech b'shem Mordechai. With regard to the story of Bigsan V'Seresh, Esther tells the king in the name of Mordechai, and that's recorded, and that's when Mordechai is brought to his great status. Another statement of Amar Abulasa, Amar Kanina, Tzaddik Ovad Lidoro Ovad. When a righteous person is lost, he's lost only in his generation, but as far as other generations, his soul lives on. So during his lifetime, he protects the members of his generation. When he dies, although this protection is lost, but his soul lives on into the next world. The question is whether he can protect the generation even after death. That's not clear from the Gemara. A person who lost a pearl, wherever that pearl is on the face of the earth, it is still called a pearl. It continues to exist. But it's lost only to its owner. Now we get to the pasuk, Haman declares, yet this is not worth anything to me. And that means that even though he's been appointed as in command, it doesn't mean anything to me because Mordechai, Omer Rav Elazar, Omer Rav Chanina b'Shosha Ra Mordechai, Haman is Mordechai Yosef b'Shar Melech Omar. When Haman saw Mordechai sitting at the king's gate, he declared at the gate, he said, Kol Zeinu Shavali, this is not worth anything to me. What does that mean? Well, the Gemara says, Ki Rav Chizda, the Omer Rav Chizda, Zeh ba b'pros buli. Mordechai came from a position of wealth. B'zeba, but Haman, here we turn to the Daf and base, b'prot boti, from a position of poverty. Omrav Papa, the Korile Avda, Dimizdavan Bitalmi. And they called Haman the slave who was sold for loaves of bread. Now, he himself sold himself as a slave to Mordechai many years previously. And whenever he saw Mordechai, he was reminded of how Mordechai was his master in the position of wealth. He was Mordechai's slave in a position of poverty. Out of embarrassment and anguish, Haman declared, and all this, being my family and my wealth is not worth anything to me every time I see Mordechai.